Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chair Wendy Morin of the Water Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Tuesday, April 9th meeting. And before we start, I'll just respectfully acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded traditional territory of Comox First Nation. And I don't think we have anybody online today, so we will just go into the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is the resolution status report. If I could have a great, Grieve and Hillian, and any discussion on that report. Seeing none, is anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that's carried. Okay, the next item is the Comox Valley Water Management Advisory Committee minutes. Okay, thank you. And are there any comments or questions about those minutes? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing nobody, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, I do believe we have staff presenting this next item. This is the Water Master Plan update. I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zoe Berkey, our Senior Engineering Analyst, will be introducing this staff report on the Water Master Plan update. So, Zoe, over to you.
Thank you, James. Through the chair, this report is intended to provide an update on the water master planning process for the Comox Valley water system. So a contract was awarded in the fall to Kerwood Lydell, and we are a little behind the original schedule that was presented within the report in March of 2023. This is primarily due to kind of two reasons. In parallel to the RFP process, we've been updating our water model, so kind of the base model that we use for modeling different scenarios, demand and growth. And that took a little longer than we were anticipating, just to ensure that the model was kind of accurately representing how our system functions. The second piece is navigating the changes in the housing legislation and how we're going to accurately reflect this in the demand modeling. So that's just taken a bit of time to kind of wrap our head around how it's going to look and be kind of accurately accounted for in the model. Municipal input into the process is key. And we have worked with city and town staff to identify 4 critical touch points throughout the process, with the first point scheduled in May. We anticipate that the water master planning process will be complete by early 2025. However, as noted within the report, timing of completion for the planning process may change as necessary to accommodate municipal staff availability. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll turn it over to any questions or comments. Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of receipt? Opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, the next item is the water restrictions options report. And okay, we've got Grieve and Grant, and we'll turn that over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. This staff report, a similar version, has been also presented to the Black Creek Oyster Bay Services Committee and the Electoral Areas Services Committee, both yesterday. And it's being presented again here today for consideration and discussion with the committee. Mark Rutten, our General Manager of Engineering Services, will be walking through this PowerPoint presentation, and then we look forward to a discussion on that. From here, the intent was to bring the topic forward, if the committee supports this, to bring the topic forward to the board for a more fulsome discussion to consider various factors, but also the water systems that the regional district as a whole has responsibility for at that fulsome level. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll support that discussion.
Great, thanks, James. Through the CAO and through the chair. Like James mentioned, Zoe Norcross-New presented this presentation twice yesterday to the Black Creek Oyster Bay Committee and the EASC, but unfortunately, Zoe has lost her voice today. So I'm here to pick it up and make the presentation. And hopefully I won't lose my voice because of this presentation. So yeah, we're this report, let's go to the next slide here. Just like to acknowledge that we are having this meeting on the unceded traditional territory of Comox First Nation, traditional keepers of this land. And this report resulted from a request by the board for staff to investigate whether it might be beneficial for CVRD to tie our water restrictions to provincial drought levels. So this is something that came up last summer. We've had a few discussions here and now have a bit more of a fulsome report on what's happening in other parts. This was prompted in part by some public confusion between drought levels, which are represented by numbers 1 to 5, and water restriction levels, which are also represented by numbers. Staff investigated what other regions on the island are doing to address water restrictions under increasing drought severity. And this report presents the outcome of the investigation, as well as some ideas for improving water conservation in the Comox Valley. So there's 3 jurisdictions that we had to look at, and I'm just going to summarize what each of them is doing and whether or not they are including the provincial drought levels in their strategy. So the Cowichan Valley has 20 different water systems, representing a combination of both surface water and groundwater, although most of those systems use groundwater. The water sources in the Cowichan Valley are very constrained, and the region has been dealing with severe water shortages for many years. This image here shows pumping that occurs in the summer to get water from Cowichan Lake into the river. So they, in the summertime during extreme drought, the lake level drops below the weir or dam, and they have to pump over it to get water into the river, to get enough water into the river. As a result, Cowichan Valley has some of the most limiting water restrictions of any island region, and they have decided to tie their water restrictions to provincial drought levels. The Cowichan Valley also has implemented universal water metering, which helps to improve water conservation. Regional District of Nanaimo. Sorry. The RDN also has about 20 water systems, all of which have universal water metering. The water systems rely on both surface water and groundwater, but for the most part, the systems have a fairly abundant water sources. The purveyors for the water systems in the RDN meet regularly to discuss water availability, restrictions, communications, and messaging. And while the systems can move between stages independently, they try to support one another and move in sync where possible. The RDN has developed a regional outdoor water conservation framework, which is a coordinated approach that provides consistent stage definitions, messaging, communications, and a single website for the entire region. The RDN purveyors opted not to tie restrictions to drought levels due to the lack of direct connection between drought levels and water availability. As part of their approach to water conservation, they have steeply tiered daily water rates, which have been successful in reducing peak flows and the strain on their infrastructure. And I just want to make the point here that they have water meters that they can continuously read. So each day they get the total water consumed by that resident, and they've structured their rates in such a way that that they increase quickly for higher consumption on a daily basis. So they can really focus in and target a reduction during those peak times. And that helps to reduce the size of their infrastructure and the cost of that infrastructure. But that approach is only possible with universal water metering. The website shown here on the screen is a one-stop shop for all residents where they can go and determine what stage they're in just by using the map feature within the RDN website. The last jurisdiction that we took a look at was the Capital Regional District. They also have numerous water systems and universal water metering in place. Like the RDN, the water is mainly abundant in the CRD, particularly from their surface water sources. They have not considered tying their water restrictions to the provincial drought levels. And in fact, last year, when most of the rest of the island was on stage 3 water restrictions, they did not move to stage 3 based on the amount of water that was still available within their source. So in the Comox Valley, water restriction stages are tied to Puntledge River flows, which are regulated by BC Hydro. Even in drought years, the modeling done by BC Hydro based on snowpack levels is able to forecast inflow levels, which allows them to adjust their rates of water release down the river to ensure that water levels in Comox Lake are high enough to maintain adequate flows for the summer months. So BC Hydro does a lot of work to predict the availability of water to last throughout the summer and fall for the required flows that they need to release to the river. A recent drought in 2022, a fall drought, opened all of our eyes to the fact that we can no longer rely on fall rains to replenish the reservoir in October. And BC Hydro has learned from this and adjusted their modeling accordingly. It's important to note that last summer, when we reached level 5 in our region, so level 5 provincial drought level, the Comox Lake Reservoir was completely full. So, these things can coincide in such a way where the provincial drought level is high, but the freshet has just finished and Comox Lake is completely full. So something to think about there. Asking residents to stop watering their lawns at a time when the water source is visibly abundant could result in significant pushback from the public and may cause undue hardship to some businesses that rely on water use. The allowable water uses under stage 3 and 4 water restrictions in the Comox Valley are more constrained than RDN and CRD. So that's just in stages 3 and 4, we already have very strict water conservation efforts here compared to RDN and CRD. Without universal water metering in place, the success of our water conservation efforts is limited as we are unable to incentivize decreased water consumption. And what actually happens with the water conservation bylaw that we have is we, during stage 1 and stage 2 restrictions, we focus people's water use into an allowable period of time. And the more we reduce that period of time, the more we focus people to only use water at that time, which actually increases our daily peak flows. So we have to be really careful when considering those changes to the bylaw. So ideas for consideration. After learning about what other regions on the island are doing, we are bringing forward the following ideas for consideration in terms of ways to improve water conservation efforts in the Comox Valley. These could be done individually or several options could be pursued together. As originally requested by the board, it is an option to tie water restrictions to provincial drought levels. Because our water availability is good for most systems, this could receive public pushback and be unnecessarily restrictive. We could leave the water restrictions unchanged and implement monthly check-ins with directors. Directors can always request to move to a higher level of restriction if they feel it is warranted. So we could have a standing item at water committee meetings, especially in the summertime when drought levels are increasing, to discuss this very issue. We could amend the existing restrictions to further tighten up summertime water use. The risk with this is it could drive increased peaks, just like I discussed a minute ago. Universal metering is a most effective way to reduce outdoor water use and reduce peak usage and the need for infrastructure upsizing. So we could consider universal metering and meters that can read on a daily basis to really create some innovative rate structures to incentivize reduce consumption. The Water Committee could direct staff to investigate funding options for the implementation of universal water metering, and that's mentioned in the report. We can also address public confusion around water restrictions by coordinating water use stage definitions and communications across the Comox Valley water systems. And the map that the RDN has is it's just a great tool. So I think we could create something like that to to make sure that people understand where they're at within the system that they live in. That's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We have a few questions and go ahead, Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for this report. I really enjoyed reading it, learned a lot from it, and especially the comparisons with the other jurisdictions. Just on the 5 recommendations, I just want to speak to a couple of them. I really like number 2, having a standing item during the summer months at this committee. I really like number 5, just coordinating the messaging and decreasing the confusion in the community about the different numbering systems. And number 4, I think is an important one as well. Your comment and in the report as well, just how important the water metering is. That was a real take home for me of that being the most important item in reducing usage. And so if, in Comox, I think it was an $8 million expenditure to put water meters in the rest of the homes that don't have them, which is just, too much. And the town keeps applying for grants and not being successful with that. So having some kind of long-term borrowing or discussion with the CVRD would be, I think, a worthwhile thing to go down. One question I had, and I've been sitting next to Director Grieve too long, but I just can't stop thinking about the farmers and thinking about them this summer. I'm very worried about them and their crops and livestock. And so, I keep coming back to lawn watering and how it's not a necessary activity for our community, although a nice convenience to have. So I was wondering if water metering is the best thing to reduce usage. Do you know of any communities, or would it be feasible in our community to tie lawn watering to having a water meter? So it could only be done if you had a water meter, and therefore you could actually control the amount and you would pay for what you use. Thanks.
So I have not heard of that being, that particular solution being used in other communities. What we see around the island and around the province is a community either is metered or it isn't metered. So, we'd have to explore that a little bit further. What's also difficult with this particular bylaw that we have and the water use requirements that we have is enforcement. So, the metering really helps with enforcement, especially the meters that you can read daily, because you can print off reports and see who's using water and who isn't. And it's really easy to see outdoor water use compared to indoor in the summertime. So without that tool, I think enforcing that kind of a bylaw would be really difficult. It's literally a matter of driving around to see who's doing what, and the resources required to effectively do that are pretty significant. So that's just off the top of my head. We'd have to take a bit of a deeper dive to know if that is possible, to require people irrigating their lawns to be on a meter and metered rate.
Okay, thank you. And moving over to Director Cole-Hamilton.
That sound. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Mark, for this. And I think that I'm just going to go through the 5, and I think I have many similar thoughts to my colleague, Director Kerr. I agree. I see a little utility in adopting Measure 1 to be sort of tying ourselves to the provincial standard when there's no actual immediate need in this community. So I think we perhaps want to follow the Capital Regional District and the RDN on not tying ourselves when there's not an actual need. I I see benefits to number 2 and this sort of a continuing discussion month by month during the summer months and responding as necessary. And also item number 5, I also see merit there in trying to coordinate our messaging as much as possible. It's not going to be easy, but certainly we'd an approach similar to what RDN is doing, including an ability to look online to see what the situation is in your particular area. I had some, and if you look at item number 4, sort of universal metering, it has shown itself to be effective, and I think the primary conversations there would need to be had at other tables. That the city and the town's councils would need to be the ones who address that. And given the large number of infrastructure challenges and other things we have on our plates, it's as Director Kerr noted, it's challenging given the scale of the price tag. So perhaps as item 4 says, looking into the possibilities for funding could be helpful. And I had one question just on number 3, the water restrictions could be amended to further reduce water consumption in terms of hours and days. I think it was in the advisory committee report. They were talking about concern that if you do that too much, then you end up having very high levels of flow for very limited periods of time when people can water. And I would assume the only alternative to that would be having some sort of system by which you'd stagger usage by people for watering their lawns, which would then become, I would imagine, quite a complex system to communicate. That you could. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts, Mark, in relation to the comment in the staff report on the challenge with restrictions and those causing kind of very concentrated flows during peak times.
Yeah, and Mike may have some input on this also, just from his experience, but using the approach that we do now, which is, odd houses on one day, even houses on another. So we're advising the community that half of them can irrigate on one day and half on the other, and then we're telling them which hours they're allowed to irrigate in. So like you suggested, we could have a more complex system where we divided the community into, for example, you could divide the community into 7 regions. Each region gets 1 day of watering and for a certain period of time on that day. So that might, help to not create such a high peak, but obviously that's not as much watering as is allowed within the current bylaw. But there are approaches like that that can be taken to further reduce. I guess the point I'm trying to make is you definitely have to be careful not to create a higher peak, which it's easy to do once you start to focus people down into just a few hours of allowable watering time.
Okay. And just curious, probably it's more of a municipal question, but are you aware of systems that do the day of the week system that you're describing? Sort of be a bit like garbage collection, where you'd divide it into the number of days that the service takes place, and people would just keep track of that. Are there other jurisdictions you're aware of that do that?
Most are doing the using the even and odd address.
Okay.
And then not necessarily every other day, but even on certain days, odd on certain days.
Okay.
That's what have mostly seen, but there probably are some other.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That's useful for now.
Okay, Director Grieve. Or sorry, I'm Grant. I meant to say, sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm not that gray, am I?
Got my G's mixed up.
Anyway, I was just, I kind of agree with what the rest of them are all saying. The one thing that sticks out to me is the water metering. And, we've got about 3/4 of our community on watering system or on water meters. And the billing system that we have is so ridiculous. It's like, you wouldn't even believe it if you saw it. It's so crazy. And so it would be really good to get everybody onto meters. The trouble is the cost. And so if there was some funding out there, like it said with RD's help, I'm not sure what that means. But if we could find funding, I think Comox would be all in on that. It's just the dollars and cents. Those things, that started at about $10 million about probably 15 years ago, so it's gone well up since then. But the things only last about 10 to 15 years. And then you got, like, we're already replacing ones from the first round already. So if there was some way to get that cost looked after like Cumberland did, then I think we'd be all in.
Yeah, there, like Director Kerr indicated, there are grant funds that are available, but they're application based and so you need to be successful in your application, which isn't always the case. In the past, the Water Committee has taken a bit of a leadership role in, and this is going back quite a ways, but there was a small part of the bulk water rate that was dedicated towards universal metering project, but it didn't last. But that's another approach that could be revisited. Yeah, so but you're right, they're not cheap and they do require maintenance, but they're recognized as one of the best tools to actually make a difference in water consumption, especially that outdoor water consumption that happens in the summertime.
Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Shara. Yeah, I don't really have any comments to make that haven't been already said, but to me, this issue is really, we could look at kind of trying to make some tweaks to improve or reduce, I should say, consumption during, times of drought and our summer months, or we can get to the heart of the issue, which is the fact that we have a lot of consumption in the municipalities that is not metered. From what I understand, I believe the electoral areas are universally metered. So really this is an issue that needs to be addressed at the municipal tables. And I mean, it is the cost of implementing the program that is what we bump up against. And I guess one of the issue is that it never gets cheaper over time. So it's expensive now, it's going to be expensive later. And I guess what we need to do is look at what kind of phasing in we're willing to do to start addressing the matter, or if we want to be still talking about how we'll get metered use 10 years from now. Really, the truth of the matter is that people don't tend to let their taps run, whether it's in their house or on their lawn, when they're paying for the water that's coming out of it. And when there's no cost associated with it, people's habits are different. I did have one question about the report, and it was related to the borrowing option, supporting borrowing. And I'm not clear how providing that would reduce costs to the municipalities. Would it not be the same borrowing that the municipalities could access, or am I missing something there?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think the cost wouldn't be any different. And I'm not an expert on this, but I understood that it might just be easier for the regional district to take on that role rather than the municipalities themselves.
Okay, yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be a cost savings, but perhaps an administrative, some administrative streamlining or something like that. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, Director McCollum and Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks, Director McCollum. I was going to ask that same question regarding, what's the difference if the municipalities, go out and borrow that money, or if the CBRD goes out and borrows it. So the other follow-up I had regarding universal metering and just my own experience with the town of Comox is I received a letter from the town of Comox saying, here's your average consumption of water on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, and your monthly consumption seems to be higher than normal over the last 2 or 3 months. So if you have any comments or questions, please give us a call. So I phoned the number and talked with an individual from the town of Comox, and they said, yeah, we're looking at your water consumption right now, and it is abnormally higher than it usually is. So you might want to maybe check out your toilet maybe there's something going on with your toilet. So we went and changed the toilet flange inside the tank. And thought, oh yeah, that should fix it. And then you get a phone call from the town of Comox 2 weeks later saying, have you done anything about, water consumption? I said, yeah, we changed the water flange in the tank. And well, maybe it's the other one. So I was like, oh, so we go to the ensuite, change out that one, and poof, away you go. So here's the perfect example why universal metering might be a benefit to everybody at the end of the day with regards to consumption on a daily basis. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we're over to Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. It's amazing some of the things you hear at this table, people's personal experiences added to the debate. So in my recollection, we had two problems last summer, which led to this report. And a lot of them were about optics. On the one hand, we had a drought that was afflicting most of the province and most of Vancouver Island. But we didn't have a problem, those of us on the Comox Lake water system, because our reservoir was full. So the challenge we had was people out there who didn't understand why we weren't imposing restrictions when there was this drought everywhere. And even some who did understand, but thought that for the purposes of solidarity, that we should be imposing restrictions on ourselves. So that was one problem. And I think that problem is largely resolved by the communication that the staff report highlights. The other issue was people, particularly in our farming community, who were running out of water. And yeah, we're coming into town and seeing water being used for all sorts of things like water parks and lawn watering and car washes and whatever. And I don't know where we're at with that. We did have the delegation last year urging us to do something, and we don't really have the capacity to share water. But I'm just wondering if we have any idea whether the situation that the farmers were in with dugouts and the like has been resolved to any extent, or are those farmers going to be in the same position this year, running out of water while they see the town, those on the water supply, having plenty of water?
Yeah, my understanding is that there is some support by the province for dugouts. There's funding available. However, the requirements to access that funding are fairly complex. And I think Director Grieve can probably speak to this better than I can, because he's brought it up a few times. But there's reports to be submitted, and quite a bit of administrative work required in order to dig your dugout. And there's you need to prove that it's not connected to surface water or groundwater. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But so there's some support from the province, but there's also requirements to meet that are a bit of a higher bar than they used to be for the installation of a dugout. So I think that's still a bit of a challenge there. One of the things that we did highlight in the report is that the Comox Valley water system does have a standpipe for bulk water. It's very inexpensive. It's not a solution for irrigating large, hay fields, that's for sure. But to keep your livestock watered, and maybe for some smaller gardens, it could, potentially could be a solution. So, I think we should communicate that and make sure that the agriculture community is aware of that if they're not already. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for reminding me of that, because that was one of the other aspects that came up. The challenges of water systems that had plenty of water sharing with those that didn't. And a number of members of the public had a hard time understanding that concept. And basically, the only way we have of doing that is through people purchasing it through that standing pipe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Delivering it by truck. So that is a limiting factor, obviously.
Right. Other than that, I agree with the comments that others have made. Thanks.
If I could just add to the, to build on what Mark was saying, CVRD is also undertaking agricultural planning work. We've had several touch points with the agricultural community, and we do have a report that's in the works that would be coming to the Electoral Area Services Committee, because that is where the focus of that ag planning work is. There is commentary in that report about water supply and about water availability. And it also talks about the role of the CVRD. I believe the intent is to share that report with the board as well as that comes along. So there is some work being done in that regard. Certainly not a plethora of solutions at the ready, but there's some commentary that you'll see through that agricultural planning work. And then, like Mark said, I think Director Grieve has been more connected with a lot of this work as well. So.
I don't know if Director Grieve has spoken yet. Have you, Director Grieve? Because I thought maybe I would go to Director Grieve first. Thank you.
Don't get me started. Yeah, this is something that is a real concern. As you probably know, the new ministry, the Walrus ministry is taking over water, and they're implementing the new legislation. Unfortunately, it's fairly draconian. I don't want to get into too much. I was going to bring forward a resolution for ABICC, but it was a late resolution, and there was still some information coming out of the province at the time. And also it was suggested that perhaps this would be something better addressed at UBCM because it's province-wide. But the big issue is the fact that a lot of the dugouts are not licensed. Some of the wells aren't licensed. And they're now enforcing the act. In fact, in some cases, they're actually, having people, large gentlemen with bulletproof vests and sidearms walking onto properties unannounced. The problem is, though, if you look at the farms in the Comox Valley, about 30% of them show tax receipts of less than $10,000. And in order to I'm going to read from Nikki Whitaker here. The application date for this is April 2nd. They need a water assessment report. You need to you have to be environmental farm plan that's less than 5 years old. You have to have an assessment done, hydrology assessment done on your pond to assure that there is no influx of groundwater into that. Anyway, the long and short of it is, and then there's a timeline where you're looking at, if you miss the deadline, you have to start again at the beginning. And you're probably looking at $10,000 plus for your assessment. If you have to put a liner in there, that's going to be another $10,000, $15,000. I mean, this is a real hardship for some of the bigger operations. It can be done, and they're probably ahead of the game. But when you think that most of the stuff you see at the farmers market and stuff like that are part of the really small farms, so they're going to have a really difficult time. In fact, if you by the time you actually comply with everything, it's going to be 2026 for them. Good luck trying to find a hydrologist to begin with. And it seems to me that, the Ministry of Agriculture is being kind of overshadowed by the other ministry because they seem to be the junior partner in this. So there's going to be a lot more to be said coming up. It's going to definitely be addressed with the ag plan. I think it's a burgeoning issue. Yeah, and if you look at the timelines, like you say, and all the red tape that's affiliated with being legally using the water that you've used, for the generations if you have a family farm, yeah, it's really going to be very much a hardship. We already see people unable to water their forage crops. So that means that they have to cut back on their livestock. That means that they can only get one cut of hay. That means that we're bringing in hay from Alberta on a semi-truck on a ferry. How sustainable is that?
Thank you, Director Grieve. Director Cole-Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. And Director Grieve, I couldn't agree more with you when you say that. And I think it seems like the standpipe though is the only real connection between what we're operating here and the need that you're seeing there. And I wish that there was a more durable connection between the two, but conservation by people in municipalities isn't necessarily actually going to do anything, sadly, to assist the plight of farmers. And with water metering, if there was no cost associated with it, I think all of us would just say conservation is the right way to go, and I think we'd just do it. Unfortunately, obviously, we have many different priorities which require funding to address them, and this is quite a large one. So I'm just going to ask the question just in terms of our water capacity. So at this point, we don't have an immediate need that's seen to further significantly reduce the water that we're drawing from Comox Lake, is what I'm hearing. Which makes the need for water metering not necessarily immediate at this time as a need. And I'm just wondering, do we, given the kind of the population growth that was modeled, that was in the LWMP that we were looking at in the previous meeting, looking at the population growth that's anticipated in consumption habits, do we have a sense of when, if at all, we are going to start running into a capacity limit with Comox Lake? And if so, when is that? And perhaps that would be something to work back from in terms of when water meters go from being optimal to being necessary.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what that looks like.
Yeah, so two things, I guess. One is the report, we tried to focus this report on should we tie our water restrictions to provincial drought levels? We have strayed a little bit, start talking about water metering and other techniques that can be used to reduce consumption for sure. But the focus of this report is, should we or shouldn't we tie water restrictions to provincial drought levels? The other question the question that you have around, how is our consumption overall? Do we have enough capacity? How much can we grow within the system that we have? The update that Zoe just provided on the Water Master Plan, that is the report that will explore all of that in detail. It will, predict, forecast the growth for the community, how the water system needs to grow, what infrastructure changes need to happen to support that growth, when we're going to need to bump up our licenses in the future and ask for more water, all those, how water metering and water conservation impact the plan, how it helps us to last longer on the water system that we have. So that all of that will be coming as part of the Water Master Plan. And one last thing to say though is that last year in 2023 was our highest year ever for water consumption. So I'm not sure what the peak day was at the plant, Mike, but it was the highest water consumption that we've ever had as the Comox Valley water system.
That's interesting, and I imagine that will continue to happen as we continue to have longer and hotter summers. Well, I think that the report that Zoe was referring to earlier, I think that's going to give us some of the information we need as to when water meters become less of an optimal choice and more of something we need to be planning towards. So look forward to receiving that information. It will give us a sense of what those timelines and limitations of capacity are.
Yeah, that report will also highlight if water meters were implemented and consumption could be reduced by X amount, you could save this much on future infrastructure requirements. So there's a bit of a correlation there that will be helpful for decision making.
Okay, we'll look forward to that discussion. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thank you. We're about 15 minutes away from the next meeting. I'm going to let Director Hardy go ahead. I guess Director Kerr snuck in there. I've got a couple comments and we do have a proposed recommendation. So we'll just start to wind down this discussion if that's okay. But we'll go to Director Hardy first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just to follow up to Director Gree's comments with regards to Walrus and Ministry of Agriculture when we're talking about water. I know I attended an evening there where Walrus was given a presentation to the local agricultural industry. And I know one of the comments with talking with some of the different folks, there were concerns again, and we've heard this at this particular table, the CVRD table revolving around private forest managed lands. And again, the impacts of their activities impacting groundwater. And I think there are studies out there that have suggested that some of the culverts that are put in place from forestry roads being put in place where naturally water would go into some of those groundwater aquifers are being diverted to different areas. So consequently, we're struggling with water in our aquifers. So again, very important item again for us to focus on from an advocacy perspective, I would think would be again the private forest management lands and how the diversion of water is impacting our aquifers. Just to follow up again with regards to Director Hamilton's comments with regards to metering, I know there are new developments that are being put in place. I'm just wondering if that's where, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for municipalities with new developments going in place to suggest that maybe new developments have that requirement where water meters are being put in. And I'm just wondering, like, that's a start with the idea of gradually we'll get there, but at least with new developments that are being put in place, that maybe some metering could be part of the requirements there. Thanks.
Okay, Director Kerr, there you are.
Thanks, Chair.
Go ahead,
And
thank you.
feel free to speak first. I was just going to make a recommendation or move a recommendation.
Maybe if I could just make a couple of comments. I do have a couple of questions, if that's okay. Let me find them here. I guess just in terms of the comparison with the other communities, I guess one of my questions was there, I know you didn't, they're not in the report, but was there any other local government that had a more similar system to us without universal metering? That was one question. And then I guess the other piece, just in light of the discussion we've had today and recognizing that we have an abundance of water and the pressure that the province, I think frankly, did put on all of the communities in the province last year around drought. They were actually saying to communities even that had water, as I was on some of those calls, you know, they were making those comments that everybody should be conserving water regardless of how much you had. So I think the communications piece is really huge. And I know we do have a recommendation here, and I'm assuming that option around communication would be included in that. But it seems like maybe Nanaimo has a bit more robust communication plan than we have. I don't know. So these were some of the questions I had around comparisons to the other communities and whether we should be deciding on any of these things at this committee, or should they all be going to the board for consideration.
Yeah, so what we had intended to do is we've now presented this report 3 times and taken notes of the feedback and questions at each. So we're gonna try to summarize that in a short covering report and then bring this to the board. So one last time to consider it and discuss it. And I'm not sure, James, if we would make recommendations in that report, but we could based on what we've heard and then go from there. So that's kind of our.
So that would be recommendations back to the water committee then?
I think it would be a combination of if there are bylaw changes, if there are technical components that the committees would have to then give consideration to, they would have to come back to the committees. The intent of going to the board is to have a more comprehensive discussion and have that coordinated approach when it comes to communication, it comes to education, as best we can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't think I had anything else that hasn't been covered. So we'll go over to Director Kerr. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just based on the discussion and some of my earlier comments, I'd just like to move recommendations 2, 4, and 5. Page 8 and 9 of the report.
I think we need to dispense with receipt. So is there anyone opposed with receipt? No, seeing none, that's carried. So your motion is not exactly that recommendation then. It's just to go with the 2, 4, and 5 or?
Correct.
And so those would be the options that would go back to the board, not the entire list of options.
Chair's prerogative. If you want to send them all back, that's okay. I think we talked about how number 1 would be a challenge given the data in the report. But if we'd like to send them all back, that could
Okay.
be 2. I would withdraw that, but I think what I heard was some support for 2, 4, and 5.
Okay, is there a seconder for that?
Second.
Okay. Do you want to speak to it further, Director
Nope, that's
Kerr?
great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to Director Grieve. Thank you.
Yeah, just maybe a friendly, I think the idea would be to highlight those, but to bring the entire report forward. Would that be amenable? Okay.
Emphasis on 2, 4, and 5 then, but going with that recommendation. Okay. Any further comments on that? Oh, Director Hardy, go ahead.
Yeah, again, just trying to understand number 4 with regards to municipalities and their ability to borrow money versus the CVRD. Like, I know that was a point that was brought forward, so I'm just kind of wondering about number 4, if we really need to seriously consider number 4 when municipalities have their ability to turn around and borrow money if they so choose for metering.
I think the intent with that was to consider whether there was any administrative efficiencies or any opportunity to borrow through the water committee, the Comox Valley Water Service, in support of the actions for Courtney Comox and the universal metering. If that does gather any kind of interest or steam by this committee, by the board, it would be a fairly fulsome process. So we would have to explore that in a lot more detail. And for the sake of the report coming to the next board meeting, it wouldn't go into that significant amount of detail, but it would put the topic on the table for consideration.
So
Oh. Sorry, what number are you? You are 6. Go ahead. Did it not go? Sorry.
Yeah. So in regards to the next meeting, I guess there be a report that gets put forward regarding that process and what the pros and cons are to that. I'm looking at it from a CVRD perspective, not a municipal government perspective, when we start looking at municipal governments having to borrow money off the CVRD when we have other big capital projects that are going on as well, right? For example, if we're looking at a turf field down the road, you know, there's costs associated with doing that. So I don't want to say we have to look at we can pursue this, but we can't pursue that. But I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, other capital projects aren't being prohibited or get put off to the side because we want dollars being borrowed from the CVRD by municipal governments for this particular type of project. Thanks.
I mean, would it not be the RD would be kind of working on behalf of the the municipal governments would still be paying for it?
Yeah, I think we heard clearly that there's a awareness that it would be a municipal council decision with some of those matters. So I would see this number 4, if it is included in what comes to the board, as very preliminary discussions and looking at opportunity there as opposed to any sort of definitive. But certainly it would be a municipal council. We heard that around the table here today, that municipal councils would be weighing in.
I think the other piece of that is that if we're getting pressure from the province and there's many communities that have universal metering, which has proven to be very helpful as outlined, excuse me, coming forward as a region and to the province in terms of grant funding or whatever, this is a direction you clearly are supporting in other communities, and having that united voice, I think sometimes can be important as well. But we'll go to Director Cole Hamilton, and then I think we will vote on the recommendation. Oh, sorry, you have a follow-up?
No, shut up.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess the question, and we had this conversation with regards to sewage and the city of Courtney having capacity issues with that. I again, just wondering about capacity issues for the CVRD if they're having to administer this project and when the meters actually get put in for the town of Comox or the city of Courtney, who's doing all that work?
I think it's pretty premature to give too many answers to that right now. They would all have to be taken into consideration, both any sort of municipal involvement, CVRD involvement, and I think, like Mark said, the water master plan. That's a big piece of work here too that will help to define what options are available to the CVRD, to the water committee, to the municipalities.
I think my question is a fair question though, with regards to capacity issues here.
I don't disagree at all. I think at this stage, we're looking for a direction to come to the board. If the water committee wants to omit number 4 or any of these other particular options, that would be direction to give to the staff too.
It sounds like if this was brought forward, that those kind of conversations would happen. I mean, it doesn't tie us to anything, bringing that option forward to the board, I don't think. We'd still be taking a look at whether that was something we wanted or not. Okay, go ahead, Director Cole Hamilton. You get, I think, the last word before
Thanks.
we take a vote.
I'll
Thanks.
be really quick. I with option 4, I would assume that like unless it was discovered there was going to be some significant saving in doing it that way, then we would probably largely put that aside. So to the degree that it'd be worth exploring, if there is any possible saving, I think it's worth looking at. And then we can consider what we have there. I just wanted to address what Director Grieve was saying. Perhaps we put all of these forward with emphasis on 2, 4, and 5. I see 1 and 2 as one says as saying completely opposite things. As a result, I just don't think we can move all 5 of them. Or one is to tie our restrictions to the province, and the other is for them to remain unchanged. So I think just for clarity, I would just suggest we stick with 2, 4, and 5.
Okay, well, that was the motion, I believe. So all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And that's our last item of the agenda. Okay, so we are terminated. Thank you.